We are in Antioch, California, northeast of San Francisco, a town of about 130,000 people.
Grab all your stuff.
Kathleen Rognaby has been out all day with her two children.
You take that in.
They've been shopping. All of a sudden, she hears her daughter, Amia, screaming.
Mom, what is going on?
And her son looks at her with a strangled look on his face and says, Mom, there's blood everywhere.
You stay right there. Oh my God.
Kathleen runs out of the house and calls 911 hysterically.
What's the emergency? My cousin, he's laying on the floor in blood. Is he alive? I don't know. Okay, do you feel like you can go in there and help him? No, I don't want to go in there. I don't want to go in there. The officers are driving there as fast as they can, okay? I'm scared. What do I do?
Kathleen is too upset to realize what's happened to her husband, and when she finds out, she's going to be even more upset. I spent my career closing murder cases. But I'm not the only one who answered the call. It takes a rare breed to solve the unsolvable, to catch a ruthless killer, to find justice for the dead. That's what it takes to be an American detective.
I was across town when my call sign came up over the air and they were sending me to a medical call, and there wasn't a whole lot of details in there.
Ma'am, what's going on?
The family was outside. No one wanted any part with going into the house. Thinking to myself, like, what am I walking into? I walk in through the front door.
Mr. Eastman?
I go to turn into the kitchen and I see the victim.
Jesus.
And there's this just huge pool of coagulated blood all around his head. And I can hear him breathe just slightly.
We got you. Hang in there, buddy.
The standard response from 911 when you report an accident and a bleeding victim, they send EMTs to the home, assuming it is an accidental fall.
He must have hit his head on the counter or something.
I'm kind of looking around and I'm wondering, how did he get this? Did he have some type of medical emergency and he hit the tip of the counter? Trying to make sense of what's going on, and at some point, I remember medical personnel said, we're going to transport him. So I went to grab him by his feet, and as we picked him up on the inside part of his shirt, where his back was,
Hold up.
I saw something. And I'm like, there's no way. And I take a closer look at it, and I go, that's a bullet fragment.
Everyone stops. This is no accident.
And as he's being transported to the hospital, I got on the radio and asked for whoever else is available to come down here because this is now an active crime scene.
Colley, take one.
My name is Corporal James Colley. In 2016, I was working for the Antioch Police Department, assigned to the Investigations Bureau as a homicide detective. Being a detective, you're always on call. And anytime my phone went off in the middle of the night, I knew exactly what it was for. There's never confusion about what it means.
Gonzalez?
I partnered with Detective Gonzalez on this.
My name is Adrian Gonzalez. I'm a corporal with the Antioch Police Department, and this was the first time I would be on the lead team.
Adrian at the time was a newer detective working property crime. I saw some potential in some of the work that he'd been doing, and I wanted to start getting his feet wet in the violent crime, homicide world.
Okay, everybody, listen up. Here's what we got.
We were told that the victim was a white male. His name was Relis Eastman.
We found out Relis had suffered a gunshot wound to the back of his head. He was alive, but historically speaking, if you're shot in the back of the head, it's probably going to turn into a homicide at some point.
Detectives?
Officer Ramirez, what are we looking at?
We've got a Caucasian male found.
So Detective Colley arrives at this crime scene and meets Officer Ramirez of the Uniform Division, who is the person that called for their assistance.
I did the walkthrough with them, and it's not your cleanest house. There's just stuff everywhere, scattered throughout. So I just assumed this is how the family lived, and it was okay with them, these living conditions.
The house looked very normal from the outside, but when you walked inside, it was a pretty contrast to that. It was very unkept. The dishes weren't done, stale food. There was clothes everywhere. The home was in a state of disarray. Items that were just scattered about the house. It seemed very lived in.
We made our way back into the kitchen, and I explained to them exactly how the victim was when I got there.
The entire kitchen was covered in blood, to the extent of there was even some brain matter on the floor from where he'd been shot. Relis Eastman got shot right in the threshold of the door that leads from the garage into the kitchen.
Blood pattern suggests he was walking this way.
So Colley assumes that Relis Eastman was moving from the garage to the kitchen. He opens the door, he takes a gunshot wound to the head, it splatters some brain tissue and some blood on the door.
I was imagining where the shooter would have been standing. And that kind of gives you an indication of how a bullet was fired and where it was fired from.
If more than one shot was fired, it more than likely went towards the living room.
I remember Detective Colley kind of starts walking around, was kind of taking the scene, and there was a TV that was hanging on the wall, and the TV screen was cracked. And he goes,
"There's a bullet hole in this TV."
The bullet in the TV was interesting because you could tell it was a straight-on bullet hole. It didn't look like it had hit something and maybe skipped.
I remember saying, that looks like a .22, just because it's such a small bullet.
We honestly didn't know what to make of that. 22s are usually target practice guns. You can shoot small rodents with it, I guess, but to see that the murder happened with a .22, it was unique.
So Colley begins as all homicide investigations begin. He doesn't know what happened, but he's thinking what could have happened here.
We started throwing around some ideas that it may have been some type of home invasion or a botched burglary. Those are not uncommon in Antioch. Antioch, it's a nice bedroom community, but Antioch has a lot of crime out here. A few years ago, we were voted the third or fourth most dangerous city in California.
The street where Relis lived at, it's a pretty quiet neighborhood, but it's surrounded by some streets that are a little bit more notorious in the Bay Area for, drugs and shootings and homicides.
Let's look around a little more.
Could this be a home invasion that goes suddenly wrong when there is a homeowner present and shots are fired? Is that possible? Of course it is.
But there was nothing that stood out that would have been an easy guess for us.
The house doesn't indicate anybody rifling through things, turning over furniture, or emptying drawers.
None of the doors had been kicked in. None of the windows appeared tampered with. And so either this was somebody that Relis knew, maybe somebody that Relis trusted, somebody that was able to get close enough to him and shoot him execution style in the back of the head. We didn't know who to suspect, but we knew it was close enough to make it that personal. My partner and I really turned our attention to Relis himself and what Relis may have been up to or something that he was involved in, because obviously something had led back to his house where he had been murdered.
Who are you, Relis Eastman, and why would somebody want to remove you from this earth? Detective Colley thinks the shooting of Relis Eastman is personal, but nothing at the scene really points to any particular individual as being responsible. So they go back outside to see what else they can find that might be of some assistance.
And so they started walking the perimeter of the house.
Hey guys, come check this out.
They find a backpack. Well, what's that doing there?
Let's see what we got in here.
The backpack had some clothing items. There was a wallet, and inside that wallet was the driver's license of Relis' oldest son, Scott Eastman.
We got more.
There was some marijuana and a pipe for it.
So now Colley's left with some thoughts. What if Scott's taste for narcotics has brought an element of danger to that family?
All right, put it all in there. Let's bag it up for evidence.
So Colley decides at the scene that he's learned what he can, which isn't much. He has a little bit. He needs a ton more.
If I have nowhere to go, I start looking into the victim themselves.
The people that have the best information about this victim are the family members. And of course, all these people are at the hospital at the bedside of the victim.
Relis was in the intensive care unit. He was unresponsive. He was connected to monitors, and he had a breathing tube to assist to keep his lungs going.
I just sat there and I held my dad's hand for a few minutes and contemplated on if he was actually going to come home to us. Because every little girl wants her dad to come home.
Relis grew up on a farm in the farmland in the heart of Kansas. So he was a Kansas farm boy. And he had just joined the U.S. Army fresh out of high school. Later on, Relis worked for a major telecommunications company.
My dad was a workaholic, supported my mom and 5 kids.
Relis Eastman was trying really, really hard to scrape out an honest living and keep his kids on track in an area where you're pretty much surrounded by horrible influences growing up.
Majorly protective. My dad did not like any use of drugs. Marijuana was not something he was okay with having in the house or around us kids. Hang in there, Dad.
At this point, police were sort of standing by to treat this as a homicide investigation.
You want to ask his son about the drugs?
Yeah, I do. Start with the wife, though.
Interviewing his wife, that's the quickest way to learn something about your victim.
The wife is always the closest to the victim, emotionally and often physically. So he talks to Kathleen Rognaby.
Kathleen, what can you tell us about your husband? I mean, how's the family dynamic?
We've got 5 kids in total.
We learned that they had 3 girls in common. And then from a previous marriage, Scott is Relis's son, Kathleen is his stepmom, and then there was a little boy, I believe he was 6 or 7 at the time.
How about your relationship with Relis?
Honestly, it's not great.
Relis and Kathleen were having marital problems. They were estranged, but they still lived together up until the time he was shot.
They sleep in separate rooms. They are going to organize themselves in a manner that they can then get a divorce.
I hate to say this, but he was just not a great husband.
Kathleen kind of wanted to paint Relis as kind of like a lech. Like he was always cheating, and he had all these women on the side.
That raises an eyebrow and is somewhat alarming to Kali.
We even threw around the idea that this could have been maybe a jealous husband or something that shot him.
So they finished with Kathleen Rogneby. They moved to Scott, the 21-year-old son of Relis Eastman.
Scott, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Whatever you need.
Scott kind of came off very unassuming. He was a kind of short, very scrawny kid. He spoke in a really weird cadence. He didn't really make eye contact.
He gets the feeling and drift from the conversation that Scott is not the sharpest knife in the drawer.
Look, we found something outside the house we were hoping you could help us out with.
We challenged him about why your backpack was in the backyard.
Scott admits, I use marijuana. I leave it outside the house so I don't have a confrontation with my dad.
Scott said that he kind of had a strained relationship with his father. But he did say that he got along much better with his stepmom.
Scott, do you owe people money for drugs or anything like that?
No, I just smoke every now and then, that's all.
Talking to Scott, his low-level marijuana use, we didn't really see that as any type of link.
Samantha, can you tell us what you were up to this afternoon?
Well, I was down the street at a friend's.
And he described that he was with 2 of his buddies.
And they were playing video games, which is his routine. He often does this.
Scott said that he had been with these friends for the entire night, but he left for a short time. Relis would get upset when Scott drove at night, so Scott had to bring the car back.
Did you see your dad?
No,
Scott told us that he parked a block away and then walked back to his friend's house because he knew that if Dad saw him, that he would make him come into the house and he wouldn't be allowed to go play with his friends.
I get that, Scott. So my old man was strict too. We'll let you go on and get out of here, okay? All right.
They failed to get anywhere with the family as to what might be involved here. They decide to go in a different direction. They do a neighborhood follow-up, knocking and talking with the neighbors.
We wanted to see who had residential cameras so we could maybe see who had been coming and going from the scene of the crime that night.
The world is under surveillance by the government or by your neighbor, but by someone.
Walking around that area, we found a couple of homes that looked like they had video cameras on them.
When he sees a camera, he stops and puts a business card on the door with a note that's saying, please call me, I'd like to see your footage regarding an incident. Smart.
Let's check this out. I just got something pretty interesting.
When Collier returns to his headquarters building, he is greeted by the ballistics report of the recovered slug. It is a .22 long rifle, and it's fired from a very unusual gun.
We got really lucky because our expert was able to link it up to an H&R 999 revolver.
An H&R model 999 is a very antiquated revolver. The revolver breaks in half to get the spent casings out.
It is clear it came from a Harrington and Richardson revolver and from no other. So that's interesting.
This is Detective Colley.
Another big break that we had in this case is when I got a call from a social worker at the hospital where Relis was. The social worker had some concerns regarding the Eastman family, saying that they wanted Relis officially dead for a potential insurance payout.
So it turns out that the policy had a value of $1 million. So that gives someone a million reasons to remove Mr. Eastman from the planet.
You know, earlier today, I got a call from one of Relis's coworkers.
This coworker told us stories about Relis and Kathleen and the dynamic of their relationship, about how conniving Kathleen was and how she kind of manipulated all the situations in her and Relis's life.
Colley begins to learn that Kathleen Rognaby has been bleeding Relis dry for 10 years, has had numerous affairs with other men, even produced a child with another man, still lives under his roof, still has him pay all of her bills.
It really painted Kathleen in a different light, because since the beginning, Kathleen put herself forward as the victim, as Relis is the one that had all the girlfriends. But in reality, it was actually flipped, that Relis was just a really good-hearted man that was walked over constantly by Kathleen.
Yeah, I think we need to talk to Kathleen again.
He realizes it's time to rethink Kathleen. So on the 30th of June, the medical staff in the ICU ward at the hospital informs the family that Relis Eastman is effectively brain dead.
I am racking my brain on what to do.
Sweetie, it's time.
And so my mom signed the papers to pull the plug.
Kathleen Rognaby makes the decision to end Relis Eastman's life. Now, is she within her rights to do that? Of course. But does she see $1 million in her future? And this is her motivation? Or does she want to stop the prolonged suffering of Relis Eastman? Which is it? One or the other? So when Colley gets that call about Kathleen being overly interested in the $1 million insurance policy, he brings in Kathleen Rognaby for further conversations.
I was really, at that point, looking at Kathleen as one of the main suspects. A lot of it was us calling her onto the carpet about certain things.
Basically, Kathleen Rognaby doesn't really say anything. I'm not responsible for this. I'm not involved in this. I didn't do anything.
Would you mind if we took a look at your phone?
We were pretty just blunt about it. Like, hey, would you be willing to let us look through your phone to see if there's any evidence of this murder on it?
It's fine.
And you could tell she was a little hesitant at first, but she gave over the phone.
She still wanted to play that. I'm being cooperative. Don't look at me as a suspect.
Sit tight. We'll bring your phone back in a minute.
Colley and I started to go through things like her messages and her phone calls.
And instantly what he found was interesting to us.
We find out she's having an affair. There was a thread with a male that was pretty obvious that that was not just a platonic relationship.
She was taking risque photos and, sending them to other men.
That is truly interesting, but that's all it is.
I started to go through things like her searches. When it comes to your search history, it's gonna show what you want in life. It's gonna show your plans.
Okay, look.
We find out that she had been researching Relis's life insurance about 3 weeks before he got murdered.
She has a very strong interest in the money that's involved in his life insurance policy.
It starts to make it look like Kathleen could have motive to be a part of this murder.
Can you tell us what you were doing the day your husband got shot?
She was able to provide receipts, and, she was with her children in other parts of the city when the shooting occurred.
I don't think you could ask for a better alibi. There's no way in any sense of the imagination that she could have possibly done this, unless she's got an identical twin running around somewhere.
Here's a thought. What if someone else was in on it?
Like the guy she was seeing on the side?
Maybe. But who would benefit most from an insurance payout? Your son?
I remember telling Detective Colley, I really don't see Scott as walking into a phone booth saying Shazam and becoming this murderer. He didn't seem to have that in him. But Colley and I discussed that there could be a scenario in which Kathleen and Scott had worked together on this.
So what's going on here, Scott? We shall see.
Scott, we just want to go over what you were doing the night your father was murdered.
The problems that we started seeing with Scott during the second interview, he began adding stuff to his timeline and his whereabouts. He told me he had gone to a chain store to buy this huge box of condoms.
So you went for condoms with what money?
The wallet was in the backyard. So then the question is, well, how are you going to pay for these condoms if you don't have any money?
I had just gone to...
And that's really when he started kind of slipping. You could tell that he was making stuff up on the fly.
When you start making changes, my boy, you're digging yourself a grave.
It's absolutely attributed to Colley's interview tactics. He's someone that's going to ask you hard questions, and when he senses that you're lying, he's not going to leave that subject.
And out of nowhere, Scott tells us, oh, I exited out of the store that has the Echo ATM on that side. And I'll never forget, that really perked Detective Gonzalez's interest.
Working in property crimes, I knew what an Eco ATM was. It's an unmanned kiosk where you can sell your cell phone. And a lot of times when people have their phone stolen, it can end up in these kiosks.
Why would you randomly say that you exited out of the store on the side that has the Echo ATM at it?
Scott says he stopped and got a few things when he was out that evening. Did you get some cash too, Scott, out of a cell phone machine?
The look on his face was like a cornered cat that just got caught.
I don't even have a cell phone.
He said he doesn't have a cell phone because he lost it. What if he needs to lose that phone because of what's in it? What better place to do it than there?
But no, if we find out you're lying to us, things are gonna get ugly. Officer, show him out.
So Colley is now faced with what? We have Mom, Kathleen Rocknaby, who has an ironclad alibi but a literal $1 million motive. Then we have Scott Eastman, who has a confused alibi and a somewhat altered one, but it's too early to say which of these could work. So we will continue to put one foot in front of the other.
My focus is on this, Eco ATM now. There's all these little hidden cameras all over the thing that take pictures of you and video of you throughout the entirety of your transaction.
Gonzalez calls the Eco ATM people, who were extremely cooperative, and provides Gonzalez with a video that may be of some use. They review that tape, and there is Scott Eastman.
It was approximately maybe 5-6 hours before his father got murdered. He's at the kiosk selling this phone that he said doesn't exist, using an ID that he said he didn't have with him.
That was a big aha moment. Scott was going to these huge lengths to keep us from finding his cell phone. And, we just found it.
So now we know Scott Eastman is a liar, and we can prove it. Why is he lying? That phone is probably going to tell us why he's lying.
We immediately went to the Echo ATM, got permission to get inside of it.
Wouldn't it be nice, as they say in the song, to find Scott's phone in that machine?
Okay, we're here. How do we get into this thing?
The person at the other end from Eco ATM told me these buttons to press that were kind of hidden around it. The ATM pops open, and at the very bottom, there's just this bin. And there's all these phones at the bottom.
They have just like a mountain of cell phones. And basically, you go through every single phone, you figure out how many of them are this right make and model.
I was nervous because I didn't want us to take this drive out there and then it not be there.
Here we go.
That's it?
Mm-hmm.
Nice job.
Finally, I found the right one, and I couldn't wait to get it back to the PD to download it.
Gonzalez races back to the station, does his magic on his computer.
Detective Gonzalez is the cell phone guru.
So the forensic software that we have will bring back deleted content. And the keyword search goes across Google searches, it goes across your text messages, it's gonna search all those at the same time. The very first search I did was for the .22 long rifle bullet.
When Gonzalez reviews the search information, he sits back in his chair and says, well, my, Scotty, you naughty little boy. What have you been doing? Nothing good.
Check this out.
There was just hundreds of searches that just blew up on the screen.
Scott Eastman is searching for Harrington and Richardson .22 revolvers in gun auction sites.
It just wasn't that Scott was searching about guns or just searching about ammo. For weeks, Scott Eastman was searching the exact ammo and the exact gun that killed his father.
After I'd found those, I typed in MOM for mom, and the keyword search just blew up. And there was just hundreds and hundreds of searches about incestuous pornography, or specifically about having sex with your stepmother.
We believed, and we had evidence from his phone, that Scott was in love with his stepmom. He was very affectionate to her. He had some of those risque photos on his own phone.
Scott Eastman apparently has a sexual fantasy about his stepmother. That's very, very strange.
That was like one of those true jaw-dropping moments, because I believe that he got it in his head that if Dad was eliminated, that they would have had his life insurance payout, and that would have made him one step closer to fulfilling whatever twisted fantasy he had about his stepmother.
So now they focus on the timeline of Eastman when he said he left his friend's house to return the family car.
Originally, Scott said that he left his friend's house because it was getting dark, and he parked the car and then came immediately back. When we verified that story with the father of one of his two friends, the father told us that Scott did leave, but he was gone for like a 45-minute period.
45 minutes. Are you sure?
Almost positive. I don't remember his...
When we compared that to what Scott had told us, Scott made it sound like, oh, it was this, 10-minute time period. Again, the friends lived close to where Scott was. It's in walking distance.
So what was Scott doing for most of those 45 minutes? Could it be that he was executing his own father? As Colley is considering all of this, he finally hears back from a neighbor that has a surveillance camera that covers the street in front of Eastman's home.
It took a while for us to get this video. It was on a street right off of Bigelow where this murder happened.
When you look at the video from that house, it shows that at 8:53, Scott parks. He exits the driver's seat, but he doesn't go west, which is where his friend's house was, which is where he said he had been. It's going back home to where his father was shot.
He specifically told us that I didn't want to be seen by my dad because he would have made me stay in for the night. And he's literally on surveillance doing the exact thing he said he didn't do.
When he returns in the frame, he's coming from the direction of his own home. He opens the trunk of that car and probably concealed the weapon in the trunk of his car.
And that was the moment when everything else just kind of fell off to the side and we knew Scott was our shooter.
So Detective Colley calls in Scott Eastman for another interview. They would like to get a statement from him that he's responsible for this crime.
Scott knew nothing at this point that we had all these searches, and I started really showing him, like, you need to come clean.
I like you the best, and I know that you feel the best when you're being honest. It's not forced. You don't have to think about it.
And then I got very confrontational with him.
Tell me about those searches.
They show him a printout of his search history for 22 pistols, for ammunition, for what it'll do to a human body.
I remember he was looking down at the paper and he got this really tiny, meek little voice. And he just said,
That came from my phone? Your phone, yes. No.
I said, you're like interviewing 101. Every time that you tell a lie, like your body language gets smaller and your voice gets weaker.
What about these? Is that what you're into? I don't care. Like, I have my own taste in porn too. That's me. If that's the thing you're into, that's what you're into. Yes.
He had denied that the ammo searches and the gun searches were his originally, but he was pretty upfront that that's what he was into when it comes to the pornography.
These are very specific. This isn't that I've downloaded the library computer. This is your computer from your phone. Listen to me for a second. There's been big moments thus far. Yes. Can we agree with that? Yes. This is the biggest moment right now. I don't want a roundabout answer. I want you to be honest about these searches. These magically didn't appear on your phone, Scott.
Colley did a great job of like just chipping away at that.
Now, this isn't like randomness. It's all from the same phone that I recovered from the kiosk that you dropped your phone off at. Tell me what that means, what the I mean, who did? Who did? I don't know.
I think it really flustered him to attempt to make up these storylines on the spot.
So, I get when you might see something like this that you're like, God damn it. Like in your mind, and you're like, that's not me. But the simple fact is that it is you.
I said, I know that you murdered your father, and here's all the evidence to prove it.
There was a long pause, and Scott eventually just said, I need a lawyer.
Scott was told from the get, like, you're free to leave at any time.
Scott Eastman has walked out of this interview in the hope that everything is just going to disappear. The difference is, when everything is said and done, Scott Eastman is going to disappear into a prison. Colley and Gonzalez have the evidence required to pursue Eastman for the murder of his father. But they wanted to try for a statement, and it didn't happen. So now they will take the next logical step. They will apply for and receive a warrant for the arrest of Mr. Eastman for the murder of his father.
I assembled an arrest team to go arrest him at his house. We all went there in full gear. You start dealing with people inside of a house, and things can go bad really quick.
We're sitting in the living room, and all of a sudden, there is banging on the front door.
I'll get it.
My mom is next to me. I open the door an inch. And by the time I have it open an inch,
Back up, hands up.
Hands. Let me see your hands.
we are pushed into the corner with policemen running into the house.
Hands up.
Kathleen, where's Scott?
Get up.
Your hands.
And he stands up calmly. He's like, I'm right here. And they read him his rights and they handcuff him. And I remember hearing them say,
Scott Eastman, you're under arrest for the murder of Relis Carl Eastman III.
I didn't know how to react. I'm thinking they gotta be wrong. It's not possible that Scott would do this to us. It's not possible for Scott to have shot our own dad.
When it comes to murder, nothing is impossible, my dear.
Scott, he goes willingly. There's no issue. And Kali is talking to Kathleen. And one thing I remember very vividly is Kali saying, you know he's in love with you.
I told Kathleen he murdered his own father thinking that you two were gonna run off into the sunset. And the look on her face was bizarre, like, almost like, wow, did he really say that about me?
And I just thought about how that was kind of like an odd reaction.
What I believe occurred on June 25th of 2016 is Scott did park his car on the next street over. Scott then casually walked to his house and was met or confronted by his dad in the garage.
Are you high again?
No.
Don't lie to me. If I catch you doing drugs, you are out of here. Do you understand me?
I think Relis turned and just walked back into his kitchen because he knew who the person was. And I don't think Relis saw that as a threat.
Scott waited for his opportunity, and when Relis walked toward the kitchen, Scott came up behind him with a .22 caliber revolver.
Scott fired that weapon, and one of the projectiles hit Relis in the back of the head. And then based on surveillance, Scott then ran out of the house, back the way he came. He stopped briefly at the car.
The street remembers. It remembers the scream no one wanted to hear, the footsteps no one could place, the siren turning the night into a warning that stayed. A narrow terrace off the falls, rain scribbling the same sentence across the pavement again and again. Midnight bleeding into Monday. A door left ajar. A lamp left on. A kettle left cooling on the hob as if time itself had miscounted the seconds and stopped halfway through a breath. Headline words ready before the first officer ducked under the tape. Cold case, missing woman, shock to the community, puzzle with teeth. She was 29. Name withheld in this telling for one reason only. The way names in Belfast carry 1,000 loyalties in a handful of letters. Call her Maeve and mean it softly. Maeve worked mornings at a bakery that outlived 3 refurbishments and 2 break-ins. She made change with fast fingers, tied boxes with red string, and walked home by the same route at the same hour because people trust routine until routine turns on them. Last scene, closing time, 9:58 p.m. A paper hat folded into her pocket, flour still ghosting her sleeves. CCTV caught her reflected in a shop window, a shadow walking inside a brighter city. After that, the footage turned useless, a ladder missing rungs, a blind eye glowing blue. The flat was not ransacked. That was the first unsettling thing. She'd set 2 mugs on the counter. One had a lipstick print, the other untouched, waited for someone who either never came or came and did not drink. Her shoes were by the radiator, toes pointing outward, as if she'd kicked them off in a hurry and then remembered her mother's voice telling her to mind the scuff marks. The window latch was intact. The back door was locked from the inside. On the table, under a placemat with sheep on a green hill, lay a bus ticket to Derry, dated for the following week, and a scribbled list. Bread, batteries, blue thread. Blue thread. It would not matter for months. Later, it would matter too much. The first call to police came at 1:07 a.m., a neighbor with thin walls and a habit of noticing. He'd heard voices earlier, low, clipped, not arguing so much as negotiating. He'd turned up the television to drown it out. When the volume could not drown his unease, he went to check the hall and found the door open to that slice of a kitchen, that lamp, those 2 mugs, the kettle like a small metal lie. He hesitated 13 minutes. He will tell this number to journalists like a penance before dialing. 13 minutes that will be counted and recounted in every timeline ever written. The response was textbook. Patrol, then detectives, then the van with equipment that makes secrets twitch. Lights went up, the lane glistened with fresh rain, and gore became absence. No blood, no hair, no fibers that didn't belong. Fingerprints overlapped like handshakes, mostly Maeve's, some her friends, 1 or 2 that meant nothing until, years later, they would. The city was not in the mood for another headline. The city got one anyway. Young woman missing in West Belfast. Family appeals for information. Police ask for dashcam footage, even though dashcams were rare in 2001. The habit of asking outruns the calendar sometimes. Her mother arrived at 3:22 a.m. Coat over nightdress, slippers wet, not hearing what anyone said. She searched the faces of the officers for the one who would take pity and tell her everything at once. There wasn't one. You don't get everything at once. You get a drip feed of maybe, and you learn to lick the salt of it and call it water. Her brother stood behind her, fists in pockets, the shape of a man who lifts furniture on moving day and carries grief quietly. The camera crews came because they always do. A neighbor swore he saw a man in a dark coat leaving at about 11. Another swore he saw nothing. A third thought he heard the word sorry. Could have been the television, could have been the sentence the city mutters to itself after midnight when the rain insists. Detectives mapped the last 10 days as if the past could be walked like a street. Maeve was not political, not indebted, not the kind who made enemies by accident. She was steady. A steady person vanishing is an earthquake that does not shake the walls, but changes the ground under your bed. They spoke to the boy she'd dated for a year and a half, a mechanic with oil under his nails, and a face that could not decide between anger and gentleness. He said they'd ended things in December. He said they'd been kind about it. He said he still had her scarf in the boot of his car and hadn't gotten round to returning it. He did not say, not then, that the scarf was blue. The bakery offered a day's wages to anyone who'd come forward with a useful tip. The tip jar filled with coins and guilt. The city said what cities always say. This doesn't happen here, not like this, not to someone like her. Then the city remembered it had said that before, many times, and fell silent. The posters went up. Her smile printed in a shade of hope the rain could not ruin. Phone lines opened, cranks dialed. A woman swore she saw Maeve at a petrol station in Newry. A man swore he saw her on a ferry to Scotland. Another said she had been taken because of something she overheard, words you should never repeat in a bar whose back room remembers the troubles like an old bruise. Police checked, police knocked, police did what police do when the ground refuses to give up a footprint. The stairwell in her building smelled of damp and detritus and old cigarettes. 3rd floor, a window with white paint peeling in curls. The detective with the notebook, there is always one, always a notebook, always a pen that finds gravity in the smallest detail, stood on the landing and listened to the building breathe. He used to listen like this in London, in Glasgow, in places where the tenements murmur their stories whether you want them or not. He listened and heard children turning in sleep, pipes clanking like distant arguments, and something else, something he could not name. Later he would call it timing. Later he would remember the tea ring on the countertop and the kettle cooling in a way that suggested the final pour had been interrupted. The clock above the oven had stopped at 10:12 when a fuse tripped. Why did it trip? Why did it stop then? No one had answers that survived the morning. The first strange thing beyond the mugs was the thread. Blue cotton in the junk drawer, right where the penciled list said it would be bought soon, not yet purchased. Why write it down? Because a hem had loosened on the lining of her winter coat. Her mother said that without guessing. She said it because she knew the coat, knew her daughter's patience, knew the habit. The thread would return later like a comet, disappearing, then making sense only because it had gone. 2 streets over, there was a bar called The Lark. A singer played there on Thursdays, and the regulars drank to the fact that Thursdays sometimes feel like permission slips. Monday night was quiet. On the night Maeve vanished, 2 men sat under the television and talked in a way that looked like silence. Around 11, one of them left by the back door. The barman remembered because the back door sticks and needs a shoulder. He remembered because the man said sorry to the door, which is not a thing people usually say. He remembered, and this memory would spend years being shaved down by retellings until only the soft apology remained. A journalist would write, "A sorry man in a black coat." No one would be certain whether the coat was truly black or just dark, whether the apology was to the door or to someone far away. Maeve's route home included a shortcut through an alley the council kept promising to light better. On the wall along that alley, someone had painted over a slogan with a square of municipal beige. Rain made it look like a wound. Beside the grin of a drain, under a loose brick, an officer with colder hands than most found a bracelet. Cheap silver, the clasp weak, a small charm shaped like a star. Her mother said she'd gotten it for Maeve when she got the bakery job. Said she'd wanted to buy the gold one but couldn't afford it. Said the silver one looked just as beautiful on her wrist. The clasp was broken, the star was scratched, but it was hers. The alley became a place with a story. People avoided it and then walked there anyway, on their way to the corner shop because the human animal cannot live on fear alone. The interviews piled up. The days became archives of almost. Her supervisor at the bakery said Maeve had been distracted that week. Not sad, not angry, something like a radio station just out of tune. The mechanic ex-boyfriend brought in the blue scarf and held it like an apology. Her best friend said there had been a man in the shop on Wednesday who watched her fold boxes too carefully, as if each crease were a secret handshake. A delivery driver remembered a parcel no one claimed. The parcel, when traced, led to a mailbox in Edinburgh that led to a company that led nowhere. The city shrugged its big city shrug and said, "Sometimes the edges don't match." The detective with the notebook did not shrug. He wrote a list of edges and tapped his pen against the ones that might one day align. Headlines multiplied, the kind that make you read fast and breathe shallow. Mystery vanishing, beloved daughter, police appeal. A white car seen idling near the alley. Engine running, no plates noted. A rumor of a late shift postman who made a delivery after midnight. A call from a payphone in Ballymena. A man crying, saying I didn't mean it, saying her name, then hanging up before the trace caught even the outline of his footprint in the exchange. The recording would be replayed in a small room where people turned sound into patterns. They would say, male, late 20s to mid-30s, local accent diluted by time abroad, grief in the throat, guilt on the last syllable, like a hand letting go of a banister. They would be wrong in the way that only precise guesses can be wrong. The man would be older. He would be from closer to home. He would be someone who touches the lives of many and passes unnoticed because that is his job. But that is later. This is now. Now is just rain and posters and a flat that looks ready for someone to come home. The kettle was bagged and boxed, the mugs too. The lipstick print would be compared against her own and match. It was hers. They looked for a second print. None. Whoever sat with her did not drink, or did not exist, or existed in a way that leaves no trace. The neighbor with the thin walls tried to remember whether the second voice had been a man or a woman. He said it was both, in the way fear makes every shadow a crowd. Another neighbor, the retired school teacher who waters geraniums like sacrament, said she'd seen a delivery uniform in the hallway. Could have been the post. Could have been fast food. Could have been someone wearing what people trust. Belfast in 2001 was a city learning to live with its shoulders not always up. Peace was a word that sat on tables like a vase you are careful not to bump. The police were rebranding, retraining, rewriting the ways they knocked on doors. The old instincts had not left. Neither had the old neighborhood's ability to keep their own counsel. A detective asked a question in the wrong pub and was answered with silence that lasted 2 songs and a round. Another asked in the right one and got a story about a van that had started appearing on Mondays, with a driver who looked like a man who'd learned to smile by practicing in the mirror. It was something. It was almost. On the 3rd day, a river team swept the Lagan along the usual places where despair and misadventure find their end. Nothing. On the 5th, a dog team combed the green bit behind the row of garages where kids swap football stickers and cigarettes. Nothing. On the 10th, the case had a board. A board means photos and strings and pins and day-by-day schedules and a gravity well at the center where the missing person's eyes look out like a question you can't answer without lying. The list of persons of interest grew, shrank, grew again. The ex-boyfriend stayed at the margin, a familiar orbit. The bakery regular with the too long stare took up a corner. The delivery driver's route made a loop that touched her lane at 10:06 3 nights in a row. He swore he never stepped out. His tachograph agreed. Machines help you lie if you teach them how. Ask the city what it remembers, and it will offer the same handful of images. The blue scarf, the rain, the door ajar, the 2 mugs, the kettle. Ask the mother, and she will give you the missing piece you can't hold, the sound of her daughter humming when she mended things, a small tune without words, an old habit from childhood when the world was only as big as the kitchen table. Ask the detective with the notebook, and he will say, timing, uniforms, doors that stick, apologies to wood and to women and to the thing inside a man that knows the end of a road when it hears it. Ask me, the voice that is not the city, not the mother, not the detective, but the reporter who learned to cut the fat and leave the nerve, and I will tell you this, the case did not grow cold. It was kept at room temperature in a house where someone opened and closed the curtains as if the day itself were a ritual and the night a threat. Later, the word solved will walk into this story like a stranger who looks familiar. It will carry documents and DNA and digital ghosts. It will say, here is the apology that never reached its destination. Here is the uniform that makes doors open. Here is the thread that was blue, because sometimes the universe annotates its own riddles. But not yet. Not in this heartbeat. In this heartbeat there is only the city pausing, the family waiting, the rain washing the street that remembers. And the headline you write in your head because you cannot help it. West Belfast 2001. Missing woman, mysterious visitor, sudden silence, community on edge, questions piling like storm clouds. Hold that headline. Keep it close. The minutes are about to change. The posters began to curl at the edges. Rain ate the ink until Maeve's smile blurred, until her eyes became pools that reflected nothing back. Time does this. It scrapes the clarity from a face. It teaches a city to look without seeing. Weeks became months, and the flat where she'd lived turned into a shrine of absence. The landlord changed the locks. Friends left notes under the door as if she might return to collect them. Every knock felt like it could be her, though reason said otherwise. The kettle stayed in evidence storage, a silent witness that said nothing. The blue scarf, the broken bracelet, the phone call from Ballymena, they circled in reports like vultures over ground that gave up no body. Detectives knew the rules of disappearance. Rule 1, the first 48 hours decide the shape of everything that follows. Rule 2, every hour after that belongs to silence. They went door to door again. They combed the alley again. They asked the bakery staff again. One officer swore he'd seen something in Maeve's time cards, a pattern that looked like a gap. A Tuesday shift swapped for a Thursday. Who asked for it? Why? The manager shrugged. People swap shifts. That's life. But the detective wrote it down in the notebook, tapping the word Thursday like it had a pulse. Whispers grew. Belfast, still tender from peace, thrives on whispers. Someone claimed she'd been seen in Donegal, working in a pub under another name. Someone else swore she'd been forced across the border. A third said she'd joined a convent. These were stories cities tell themselves to soften the edge of loss. Stories are easier than admitting a person can vanish into bricks, into rain, into thin, sharp nothing. The family endured interviews where questions bruised like blows. Was she troubled? Did she owe? Did she drink? Did she keep secrets? The mother's answer was always the same. She baked bread, she sewed hems, she hummed when she worked. That's who she was. The case went stale in headlines, but never in the precinct. Files stacked up, moved from desk to desk, transferred when detectives retired, carried like a burden no one wanted to inherit, but no one could discard. It became known as the Kettle Case, in whispered shorthand. A reminder that sometimes a single object holds the weight of the unsolved. 3 years later, in 2004, a small thing happened. A burglary gone wrong in another district. A suspect picked up prints run through the system. One partial matched a smudge from Maeve's kitchen table. Not enough for charges, but enough to wake the case. His name was Daniel Crow. Local, 34, odd jobs, 2 prior arrests for theft. He swore he'd never been near Maeve's flat. Police questioned him hard. His alibi for that night was thin, stitched together with lies that showed their seams. But without a body, without a confession, without a direct tie, he walked free. The file grew heavier. The mother sat through every press conference, her face an emblem. The city looked at her and saw its own guilt, the guilt of a place that swallows daughters. Each year on the anniversary, flowers piled against the bakery door. Each year, a candlelight vigil lit up the alley where the bracelet was found. The blue scarf became myth. photographed, speculated on, whispered about as if it contained the story no one could tell. Detectives followed a theory. Maeve had met someone new. A man who came for tea that night, sat at the table, never touched his cup. They traced everyone she'd spoken to in the last 2 months. They leaned on coworkers, old classmates, casual acquaintances. Nothing fit, nothing clicked, until a single witness emerged in 2006. A young woman, now older, who admitted she'd once seen Maeve with a man outside the Lark. Dark coat, dark hair, polite but wrong somehow. He had touched Maeve's elbow when they walked, as if steering her. The witness said she remembered because of the apology. The man had whispered sorry when he noticed her staring, the same word the barman remembered. Sorry. Always sorry. Years passed. The alley was repaved. The bakery changed owners. The posters faded. But the detective with the notebook, older now, slower, kept the pages close. He carried them through moves, through restructures, through winters that stiffened his joints. He would tell younger officers, "Don't let this one slip." Cases like this rot the bones of a city. They breed distrust. Solve it, and you give the place back its breath. Technology advanced. DNA testing sharpened. Databases widened. Every so often they would run the mug handles again, the kettle spout again, the scarf again. Every so often they would come up empty, until the day a fragment, a trace so faint it had once been invisible, bloomed under new analysis. It wasn't Maeve's, it wasn't family, it wasn't Daniel Crow, it was someone else. The name surfaced in 2015, a postal worker, longtime employee, no record, ordinary in every way. He had walked the neighborhood daily, delivered letters, worn the uniform that unlocked doors. On the night Maeve vanished, he'd been off shift, but uniforms can be borrowed. Witnesses, re-interviewed, remembered a man in such clothing near the stairwell. A uniform was trust. Trust was entry. Entry was disappearance. The mother lived long enough to hear this. She sat in a police station 14 years after her daughter vanished and listened to a detective say, "We think we know who was there. Not solved, not yet, but closer, closer than ever," and then silence again. Investigators waited for stronger proof, waited for a confession, waited for something solid to pin the uniform to the man. The community groaned under the weight of waiting. Headlines flickered. New lead in Belfast, cold case. People dared hope. People doubted. The scar of the story stretched longer. By 2019, 2 decades had passed. Maeve's name became a shorthand for the unsolved, a warning told to daughters about trusting anyone, even a uniform. The alley was lit now, bright as day, as if lighting it late could undo the shadow cast years before. But the case did not die. It sat in the dark, gathering weight. Every box of evidence, every taped interview, every haunting second on that unanswered call from Ballymena, everything waited for the moment the city least expected, the moment when an old thread, blue and frayed, would finally pull tight and reveal the seam. And in late 2020, a breakthrough came not from Belfast but from an archive across the sea. The courtroom was built for spectacle, though no one would admit it. High ceilings, polished benches, the echo of shoes on stone designed to make the accused sound small. Reporters filled the press gallery, pens poised like daggers, cameras waiting for the single image that could distill 2 decades of pain into one front page. Outside, the crowd swelled. Neighbors, strangers, protesters, supporters, all pressed together in a storm of whispers. Belfast had lived with Maeve's absence for 19 years, and now it wanted blood, or truth, or something that looked like closure. Patrick Doyle entered under guard, clean-shaven, eyes down, uniform exchanged for a gray suit that didn't fit his shoulders. To some, he looked like a man defeated. To others, he looked like a man too ordinary to have stolen a life. The headline practically wrote itself, "Postal worker on trial for 2001 murder." The prosecution laid out the bones of the story with a precision that felt like surgery. The voice from Ballymena, the jacket with the crude repair, the fibers linking to Maeve's coat, the bracelet clasp with DNA locked inside it like a frozen scream, and above it all the timeline. Maeve seen alive at 9:58, door ajar just after 11, Doyle's route placing him in the neighborhood, witnesses swearing to a dark coat, to a man whispering sorry. It was enough to paint the picture. It was not enough to fill in the colors. The defense hammered at the gaps. No body, no weapon, no direct witness. They painted Doyle as a scapegoat, an ordinary man, sacrificed on the altar of an unsolved case that haunted the police too long. They said the evidence was circumstantial, the fibers too common, the bracelet too contaminated. They said the voice on the tape could be anyone. They said memories rot after years, that witnesses remembered what they wanted to remember. Maeve's mother sat through every minute, her small frame dwarfed by the bench, her hands folded around a tissue that never left her grip. She did not cry. She did not look away. She stared at Doyle as though she could will him into telling her where her daughter was. He never met her eyes. The jury listened. 12 strangers tasked with untying a knot the city had pulled at for 19 years. Every testimony was a nail. The detective with the notebook, hair gone gray, voice slower now, took the stand. He spoke of the mugs, the kettle, the silence in the stairwell, the timing that never added up. His words carried the weight of someone who had lived inside the case, someone who had aged alongside it. When he stepped down, the room exhaled. Then came the voice analyst. He played the tape, the hiss, the sorry, the breaking tone. Then Doyle's training session clip from years later, his cadence identical. The vowel stretched in the same place. The courtroom went still. The analyst said the probability of coincidence was microscopic. The defense objected, the jury wrote notes. The mother closed her eyes, and still, no body. The absence sat in the center of the room, louder than any testimony. The prosecution leaned into it, saying absence itself was evidence. Maeve had never called, never collected wages, never renewed her bank card, never breathed another day. People don't vanish by choice. They vanish by force. They vanish because someone takes them. The defense whispered alternative theories like poison, that Maeve had run, that she'd left by choice, that she was seen alive in another city. They brought up the false sightings, the pub rumors, the convent story. They suggested obsession, not murder. They asked why Doyle, with no record, no violence in his past, would suddenly commit a perfect crime. They asked why, if he had done it, he had not slipped once in 2 decades. The trial stretched for weeks. Headlines screamed daily. Community divided. Cold case trial stirs old wounds. Some nights outside the courthouse, candles flickered, vigils reigniting the flame of absence. Other nights, shouts of free him clashed with shouts of murderer. Belfast relived its fractures, one whispered theory at a time. Then, a twist no one expected. Midway through proceedings, police searching Doyle's property again uncovered something missed before. A shed behind his house, floorboards warped with damp. Beneath them, in a hollow space filled with rust and earth, they found a box sealed with tape. Inside, belongings that should not have been there. A bakery apron, a notebook filled with Maeve's handwriting, a single photograph of her smiling at a work party, and at the bottom, a lock of hair bound with blue thread. The courtroom erupted when the evidence was introduced. Gasps, tears, shouting, the judge hammering for order. The defense crumbled, scrambling for explanation, suggesting framing, planting, conspiracy. But the blue thread tied it all together. The list, the coat, the jacket repair, now the lock of hair. It was too neat, too precise, too damning. The jury deliberated for 2 days. The city held its breath for 2 nights. Pubs filled with speculation, kitchens lit late with whispers. On the 3rd day, the foreman spoke the word everyone had waited years to hear. Guilty. The sentence fell heavy. Life imprisonment with no possibility of parole for at least 20 years. Doyle stood silent as it was read. He did not flinch. He did not beg. He simply whispered one word to himself, caught only by the microphone clipped to his lapel. Again, it was sorry. Maeve's mother closed her eyes, pressed the tissue to her lips, and let the years finally fall. The city exhaled. Headlines screamed, Belfast 2001 cold case solved, postal worker convicted. But beneath the relief, beneath the roar of justice, a hollow sound lingered. No body, no grave, no final place to lay flowers. The truth had come, dressed in shadows. The sentence gave answers, but not peace, and Belfast, though satisfied, still carried the echo. The missing never return. The absence never ends. The gavel had fallen, the sentence delivered, and the courthouse emptied into the damp Belfast air. But verdicts do not stitch wounds, they only mark them. Outside, the crowd split into 2 camps, one cheering through tears, the other muttering disbelief. A man who had delivered their letters, their pension checks, their postcards, now branded a killer. Some said justice had come too late. Others said it had come to the wrong man. The city wore its confusion like a second skin. Maeve's mother left through a side door, guided by officers who shielded her from cameras. She clutched the tissue that had survived the trial, crumpled and soaked but never released. When asked for comment, she said only, I want to bring her home. Not about Doyle, not about justice, just home. The word carried across microphones, across headlines, a reminder that guilty does not equal closure. Doyle was led to Magaberry Prison, gray walls, iron gates, a place built to hold men who wear their crimes on their skin. Yet he walked in quiet, shoulders bowed, a man who had hidden in plain sight for decades now forced into the spotlight of infamy. Guards whispered among themselves. He didn't look like a killer, but killers rarely do. Inside Belfast, Conversations boiled. In pubs, men argued over pints, voices raised, slamming fists into wood. Some cursed his name, convinced the trial had finally unmasked a predator. Others swore the evidence was circumstantial, that Doyle had been framed, that someone higher, darker, had orchestrated everything and left him to take the fall. Old suspicions reawakened, the kind rooted in a city's history of secrets. The phrase cold case once meant distance, but now it meant division. Journalists dug deeper. They traced Doyle's past, looking for patterns, hidden moments, unexplained gaps. They found little. A man who clocked in, clocked out, lived alone, collected stamps, visited his sister twice a month. Ordinary. The ordinariness itself became sinister. Reporters painted him as a mask wearer, a ghost who passed unnoticed. Every photograph of him in uniform now looked different. Smiles that once seemed polite now read as hollow. Headlines sharpened. The killer next door. But Maeve's body remained missing, and without it, shadows lingered. Investigators returned to the alley, the river, the shed. They probed the fields beyond the motorway. Each dig was a hope sharpened, each empty hole a knife twisting deeper. Without a grave, the family could not mourn properly. Without remains, the city could not release its obsession. The detective with the notebook, retired now but still restless, walked the streets on his own time. He visited the bakery, now under new owners who knew the story but not the girl. He sat in the Lark, at the bar where the apology had first been heard, listening for echoes in the wood. He stared at the alley, now bright with new lamps, but still heavy with the weight of what was never found. He wrote one last line in his notebook before putting it away for good. Solved is not the same as finished. The community carried scars. Mothers warned their daughters about routine, about trust, about doors left ajar. The case became legend, a ghost story for a new generation. Children who had not been born in 2001 grew up knowing Maeve's face from posters and vigils, her name etched into the city's rhythm. The girl with the kettle, they whispered, not knowing the details but knowing enough. In Magaberry, Doyle lived his days in silence. Other inmates tested him, baited him, demanded details. He gave none. At night, guards reported. He whispered to himself the same word, sorry. Always sorry. Whether for Maeve, for himself, or for the silence he kept, no one could tell. Maeve's mother visited the fields once a month, laying flowers on empty ground. Reporters no longer followed her. The cameras had moved on. But locals saw her kneeling in the grass, lips moving in prayer or conversation, as if she spoke to her daughter through the earth. She never stopped. She could not. Absence is a hunger that does not fade. Years later, documentaries would frame the case as a triumph. Persistence, technology, justice delayed but delivered. They would replay the tape, the hiss, the apology. They would cut to headlines, to vigils, to the courtroom's climax. They would call it solved. But for those who had lived it, it was never solved, only named. The wound remained. And in the city, when rain hit the pavement just right, people swore they could still see her reflection in the shop window from that last night. Maeve walking, hat in her pocket, flower on her sleeve, steps steady, unaware that she was walking out of history and into legend. Belfast remembers. It always will. The years after the trial should have been quiet. They should have settled into routine, with Patrick Doyle locked behind bars and Maeve's family left to tend their grief in silence. But Belfast is a city that never stops whispering, and whispers are louder than verdicts. By 2025, doubts had begun to stir again, creeping in like damp through old brickwork. It began with a podcast, anonymous, low budget, recorded in a back room with a single microphone and the hum of traffic bleeding through the walls. Its title was blunt, The Girl Who Never Came Home. The voice of the host was disguised, flattened by filters, but the questions were sharp, cutting through the neat narrative of guilt. Why had Doyle's DNA appeared only on a fragment of a bracelet clasp that had been handled, bagged, stored for years? Why did the timeline hinge on a witness who had admitted their memory was blurred by alcohol? Why was Maeve's body still missing if Doyle had supposedly confessed in all but name? Each episode dropped like a stone into water, rippling outward. At first, the police dismissed it, internet noise, speculation dressed as fact, but the public listened. Downloads climbed, forums lit up with debates, old theories reborn. The word frame appeared again and again, a scapegoat, a cover-up. Had Doyle been the convenient man in uniform, the tidy answer to a question the city was too tired to keep asking? The podcast brought new voices into the light. An ex-prison guard who swore Doyle had once whispered to him in the yard, "It wasn't me." I carried the bag, but I didn't make it disappear. A retired postal colleague who remembered uniforms being swapped freely, borrowed for odd jobs, discarded without record. A woman who claimed she saw Maeve arguing with someone days before she vanished. A man not Doyle, taller, broader, with a scar across his cheek. Her statement, she said, had never been taken seriously. Headlines flared again. Belfast, cold case doubts. Podcast raises questions. The city, long convinced it could rest, found itself awake at night, replaying the old reel of fear. The bakery, the alley, the kettle, the scarf. Everything was familiar, but familiarity twisted itself into unease. The police responded defensive but firm. The conviction had been sound. The evidence was clear. The trial had been fair, but cracks showed. Reporters requested files. Activists demanded transparency. The detective with the notebook, now old, wheelchair-bound, broke his silence for one last interview. He admitted something he had never written down, that the night of Maeve's disappearance, a neighbor had mentioned seeing two figures, not one, leaving the stairwell. That detail had been dismissed at the time, chalked up to confusion. But now it haunted him. Two mugs, two figures. He said the words slowly, as though afraid of their weight. Maeve's mother had passed away the year before, never knowing more than what the court had given her. But her son, Maeve's brother, took up the torch. He attended vigils with a fury that his mother had never shown, demanding answers, demanding searches. His voice cracked across microphones. If Doyle was guilty, why don't we have her? If he wasn't, then who was out there still? Prison officials reported Doyle was deteriorating. Age had thinned him. Time had hollowed him. He no longer whispered sorry. He barely spoke at all. But once, during a routine medical check, when asked about the box in his shed, he muttered, "I kept it safe, that's all I did. I didn't take her. I didn't bury her." The doctor noted it. The note leaked. The city shuddered. The podcast grew bolder. The host claimed access to files never meant for the public, hinting at names scrubbed from the record, sightings ignored, evidence misplaced. One name surfaced, Daniel Crow, the burglar whose prints had once appeared on Maeve's kitchen table. A man dismissed, set free, forgotten. The host asked why Crow had never been re-examined, why his movements that night were left in shadow. By the summer of 2025, the case was no longer solved, at least not in the minds of the people. Documentaries that once framed it as triumph now reeked of incompleteness. New graffiti appeared on walls near the alley. Where is Maeve? Candlelight vigils swelled again. Younger faces now. Teenagers who had grown up with the myth but demanded truth. The phrase cold case solved no longer fit. It rang hollow, like a bell cracked down the middle. Solved means finished. But Belfast looked around and saw nothing finished. A guilty man behind bars, an empty grave, a family line still screaming into the dark, and one final chilling thought. If Doyle wasn't the one, then somewhere in Belfast or beyond walked a man who had been sorry once and silent ever since. The podcast no longer whispered. By autumn it roared. Each new episode arrived like an explosion, shaking Belfast with questions the trial had buried. Anonymous voices called in, their stories stitched into the narrative. One claimed they'd seen Maeve that night in a car with two men, one driving, one in the back beside her. Another swore they'd been silenced years ago by someone higher up who told them to keep their mouths shut if they valued their safety. The podcast stitched these fragments into something jagged and terrifying. What if Maeve's disappearance was never just about a uniform, but about a secret that someone wanted gone? The 7th episode hit like a hammer. The host, still disguised, still hiding behind a voice filter, revealed leaked transcripts from the original investigation. Among them, an overlooked interview with Daniel Crow, the burglar whose prints had appeared in Maeve's flat. His alibi had been flimsy, his story inconsistent, yet his name had vanished from later reports. The transcript showed him mentioning a friend in the postal service, a friend called Pat, a friend who sometimes looked the other way. The line had been underlined in pen, then crossed out. Why? Who decided Crow was irrelevant, and why did the connection to Doyle disappear from the record? The city buzzed with rage, calls for a retrial, demands for an inquiry, hashtags flooded social media, #where is Maeve, #cold case, unsolved, #justice for 2001. Young people who hadn't been alive when she vanished now filled the streets with candles, chanting her name. Journalists chased every lead. Politicians were cornered with questions about oversight, corruption, silence. Belfast once again became a city standing in the rain, waiting for truth. Inside prison, Doyle broke his silence. Word spread from a fellow inmate who swore Doyle had said it aloud in the yard. "I didn't kill her. I only delivered her." Delivered. The word hung like smoke. What did it mean? Delivered where? Delivered to whom? Reporters latched onto it. The podcast dissected it. and families across the city replayed it in their heads until it twisted into nightmare. The host of the podcast doubled down. They released maps of delivery routes, suggesting Maeve may have been intercepted, passed along like a package. They tied in sightings from the ferry, the pub, the scar-faced man. Suddenly, the picture shifted. Doyle was no longer the solitary predator in the story. He was the accomplice, the middle link in a chain. Shock deepened when a retired officer came forward, his voice cracking on national radio. He admitted that in 2001, higher-ups had pressured the team to avoid chasing angles that might stir political trouble. The city was fragile then. Post-Good Friday, peace like glass. A scandal involving someone with the wrong connections could shatter it. So the theory of multiple men, of organized disposal, of a wider net, it had been silenced. We were told to keep it simple, he said. We were told one man, one crime, but it was never that simple. Maeve's brother burned with fury. He stood at a vigil in the rain, holding up her photograph, shouting into cameras, "We don't want neat, we don't want convenient, we want the truth. Don't tell me it's solved if you can't tell me where my sister lies." His voice cracked, but the crowd roared back. And in living rooms across Belfast, people turned off their televisions and sat in silence. Because what they heard in the podcast, what they heard in the streets, felt truer than the verdict that had once been delivered in polished marble halls. The cold case was solved once, neatly, officially, but now, 24 years later, it was unraveling in real time, spilling its secrets across a city that could no longer pretend. The podcast ended its 7th episode with a question that cut like a blade. If Doyle delivered Maeve, then who received her? And Belfast, awake once again, realized it was still living inside the mystery. The podcast's 8th episode dropped at midnight. By dawn, Belfast was wide awake. The host promised a revelation, and it arrived with the weight of dynamite. A leaked report, never seen outside the original task force, cataloged persons of interest from 2001, names that had been circled, notes scribbled, theories tested, then abandoned, and one name made the city freeze: Daniel Crow. He had vanished from public memory, erased after his prints were dismissed as non-probative. But the leaked file showed more. It recorded a witness who saw Crow near Maeve's block the night she disappeared. It listed his criminal record: burglary, intimidation, petty violence. It noted connections to men in uniform, including one postal worker, Patrick Doyle. The document contained a line underlined twice: Crow possibly involved with Doyle, joint operation suspected. And then, in another hand, one word scrawled across it: closed. The revelation cracked the case wide open again. If Crow had been with Maeve, why was Doyle the only one behind bars? If Doyle delivered, as his whispered confession hinted, then perhaps Crow was the one who received, the one who vanished with her into the shadows. The city erupted. Headlines screamed. Leaked report suggests second man. Crow's name was on every screen, every wall, but Crow was gone. He had left Belfast in 2008, supposedly to work construction in Scotland. No one had heard of him since. His absence became its own dark headline. Mystery accomplice disappears. Maeve's brother called it betrayal. At a press conference, his voice trembled but did not break. If the police knew there were two men, why did they stop at one? Why did they let the other vanish into thin air? My mother went to her grave believing she had answers, but she was lied to. The crowd outside the courthouse roared back with chants. Where is Crow? Where is Maeve? The podcast followed the trail across borders. Listeners traced fragments. A Daniel Crow sighting in Glasgow in 2010. A man by the same name renting a flat in Liverpool in 2012. Rumors of him working under aliases, disappearing again and again. A ghost. Some swore he was dead. Others swore he was still out there, watching the story unfold, listening to the city scream his name. Meanwhile, inside Magaberry, Doyle grew gaunt, his silence now broken by sudden bursts of muttering. Guards reported him waking at night, shouting, "I left her at the gate." At what gate? Whose? Every word added to the city's fever. Was it the gate of a house, a warehouse, a checkpoint? The podcast replayed the phrase over and over, dissecting it until speculation turned to obsession. The police were cornered. A reopened inquiry was demanded. Officers spoke carefully, admitting possible oversights, promising a review of the Crow angle. But the damage was done. Trust cracked. The city's faith in closure shattered. People who had once believed the verdict now carried doubt like a torch. The vigil at the alley grew larger. Flowers multiplied, candles lined the walls, photographs of Maeve layered over each other until her face became an icon. On one wet night, a single word was spray-painted across the bricks: delivered. The word Doyle had muttered, the word that defined the case now. Delivered, but to whom? And then came another shock. The podcast host, breaking pattern, claimed to have a source inside the prison, a guard who had heard Doyle whisper a name in his sleep. a name not yet spoken in court, not yet written in files. The host did not reveal it fully. Just the first letter, just enough to ignite panic. It begins with C, the host said, and the city should be afraid. By morning, Belfast was buzzing with rumors, every C name dragged into suspicion, every shadow carrying a new threat. The trial had once promised an ending. Now it felt like the beginning of something darker. And in the silence between episodes, the city waited for the next revelation, knowing it would not bring peace. Only another jolt, another ghost pulled from the rain. The 9th episode didn't arrive on time. Midnight passed. Listeners refreshed their feeds in silence, waiting, hungry. 1 o'clock, 2, nothing. Belfast buzzed with unease. By morning, the city was a pressure cooker, the rumor of the missing episode bigger than any broadcast. And then, without warning, it appeared. A simple title, The Man Called C. The voice of the host came slower this time, distorted but trembling at the edges, as if even through filters fear had crept in. He spoke of a name buried in the old files, a man who had surfaced in witness statements only to vanish under redaction, a man tied to Crow by debts and nights in bars where silence was currency, a man the police had written off as peripheral. But the host said no, he was central. C is not just a letter, C is the missing link. Clips played, an old interview transcript. A witness describing a man with a scar, tall, broad, called something like Crawford, Crowell. The audio skipped, hissed, ended. Another document, leaked again, listed as C, possible associate of Crow, violent tendencies, and in the margin another scrawl, do not pursue. The city convulsed. Was C Crawford? Craig? Something else? Every rumor became a headline. Newspapers printed lists of men with C surnames once connected to the area. Social media lit torches, naming names, pointing fingers. Innocent men woke to find their doors sprayed with the word killer. Belfast became a city haunted by a single letter, and inside Magaberry, Doyle broke completely. Guards reported him whispering louder now, louder each night. Crow took her, C held her, I left her at the gate, I left her there. He would repeat it until his throat cracked. Prison officials, shaken, leaked the fragments. The podcast aired them like gospel. Delivered. Gate. Crow, C, a chain that led into shadow. Maeve's brother stood in front of reporters, shaking with fury. Don't give me letters, don't give me riddles, give me her, give me my sister. His voice carried into the night, but no answer came. Then a new twist. A retired journalist, rummaging through his old notes, released a photograph from 2002, grainy, blurred, taken outside the Lark. It showed Maeve, days before her disappearance, standing with 2 men. One was unmistakably Crow, the other was taller, broader, half turned away. The flash caught a line across his cheek, pale, raised, unmistakably a scar. His identity was never confirmed, but the photograph reignited every fear the city thought it had buried. The podcast's 9th episode ended with silence. No music, no outro, just the host's final words. If C still walks free, then Belfast is not safe. If C still walks free, then Maeve's case was never solved. Ask yourself, how many more gates have been opened? How many more were delivered? The city recoiled. Shopkeepers whispered at closing time. Mothers walked their daughters home in daylight. The old fear was back, the kind that lived under the skin. Belfast had thought the past was buried, but the scar across its face still bled. And in the alley where candles never stopped burning, a new word appeared on the wall beside delivered. A single letter sprayed in black. By morning, the letter had multiplied. C on shutters, C on bus stops, C chalked on pavements like a breadcrumb trail only fear could follow. Belfast felt wired, pupils blown, a city that had slept with the lights on and woken to find the dark already in the room. The podcast's 9th episode had ended without music, without a safety net, and the silence that followed became an instrument of its own. People filled it with theories, with maps, with long, trembling threads online that tied every scarred man in the greater Belfast area to a crime that had become a mirror. Everyone saw what they feared most. By noon, the story wasn't local anymore. Satellite trucks jostled outside the Lark like gulls at a trawler. National anchors wore solemn faces, intoning the headlines that snapped the spine of an afternoon. Belfast cold case explodes. Mystery, C haunts city. Officials stood at podiums saying the phrases they always say when the facts haven't caught up with the panic. We urge calm. We caution patience. We are reviewing new information. The caution sounded like a warning you whisper to a tide. The police, cornered, announced a formal review. The word everyone knew meant an old wound cut open with new knives. An independent team, outside oversight, a promised audit of the original files. The detective with the notebook, now more memory than man, was wheeled through a side door to avoid cameras. He gave one quote to a reporter he trusted. The thing about knots is that pulling won't help if you don't first see how they were tied. It ran under a photograph where he looked both proud and haunted. Belfast looked like that too. The podcast host posted a single message. Midnight, no title. No teaser. Just a time. The city began counting down in its bones. But before midnight arrived, something else did. At 17:10, a young barista on the dock side of town called in a tip. She'd been closing early. Fear shortens hours. It makes daylight feel like a curfew. When she saw 3 men near the old freight road, arguing. One broad, one wiry, one with a limp, all shadowed by a stack of shipping containers. The broad one wore a cap pulled low. When he turned, the barista swore she saw a line across his cheek catch the winter sun. Scar white as chalk. They saw her see. They scattered. The call went out. Units rolled. The cameras followed like weather. By the time the police arrived, the containers sat mute. Mouth after metal mouth, rows of rust and numbers. The air smelled of engine oil and distance. Near the gate marked 14, a number painted and repainted so many times it looked embossed, officers found a padlock snapped clean and tossed like a coin. Inside, among wooden pallets and twine, lay a chair, a thermos, a uniform jacket. Postal red faded to the color of dried roses. Its lining was torn. The stitch that held it together was blue. You could feel the city's breath hitch, even through television. Gate. A gate. I left her at the gate. The words Doyle had been spitting into night air came back like prophecy. Reporters tripped over the sentence. Anchors repeated it until the syllables lost meaning, and then regained a new one that felt like fate. The camera panned to a chain-link fence where someone had wired ribbons, the same ribbons that appear when a place is baptized in grief. Even through the screen, you could tell the blue ones outnumbered the rest. The container yielded more. A roll of duct tape fossilized with age, a grocery bag from a chain long shuttered. Beneath a pallet, a biscuit tin. Inside, photographs of women. Dozens, maybe 100, all clipped from social pages, newsletter corners, staff notice boards. Each had notes scrawled on the back in block capitals. Route, time, habits. Some were crossed out, some had arrows, some had a single letter in the corner. On the card where Maeve's smile had been glued, there was one letter only, C. If this were a film, the soundtrack would have dipped. In life, the soundtrack is a heartbeat. The city heard its own. The podcast dropped early. 18 minutes before midnight, the tile lit up on phones across Belfast like a flare. The title was a question painted in red, Gate 14. The host spoke without filters now, the voice still low, still careful, but no longer blurred. Here is what we were never meant to see, he said, and he did not pretend the container was a coincidence. He laid out a map of the docks from 2001, showed how freight moved, how shifts overlapped, how a man with a key and a uniform could slip through with no one asking his name. He overlaid delivery routes like webbing. He rotated the city until the pattern stood out. The old lane, the alley, the river, the docks, 4 points in a line if you were looking from high enough. A conveyor, he said. A human belt. One man delivers, another receives. He named Crow. He stopped at C. He said the name was in a file and out of his mouth, but not yet ready for fear that would flood the wrong door. He played a clip he had held back for weeks. The Ballymena tape, clean to crystal. The sorry was no longer a smear of regret. It was a blade. You could hear the breath on the receiver, the trembling on the last word before the hang-up. I didn't mean for it, the voice said. And now that the docs existed in our heads and on our screens, the sentence sounded like coordinates. Crow's ghost refused to stay a rumor. Reporters in Glasgow found a record of a man by that name checked into a hostel in 2010 under a false date of birth. In Liverpool, a landlord remembered a tenant who paid cash and kept to himself. The pattern turned migratory. Men like him don't stop, they fade. The host said as much and then asked the only question that mattered, did C fade too, or did he stay? As if on cue, a photograph surfaced. Fresh, not grainy. A security camera still from a petrol station outside Carrickfergus, time-stamped 2 nights prior. The man in it wore a cap low, a collar high, but the line that crossed his cheek mocked disguise. The police did not authenticate it. They didn't have to. Belfast did it for them in real time, overlaying the old Lark photo with the new still, matching pixels to memory, demon to alias. The stations ran the frame on loop while a superimposed headline did the shouting. Scarman spotted. Who is C? The podcast host said he had the name and the place and the decade of absence to prove it. He would release it at dawn, he said, after delivering files to investigators so the city would not rip itself apart. He begged listeners not to dox, not to torch, not to spray a door with certainty and gasoline. "We're at the edge," he said. "One more step and we fall into the same hole that swallowed Maeve. Don't let the city do to itself what was done to her." But the city had been alive too long on mystery to fast. A crowd gathered at the docks. Someone brought a ladder and climbed the container stack like an altar. A chant began, "Where is Maeve?" and built until it was no longer a question but a drum. Police formed lines. A bottle arced, smashed. Fear grows teeth. Down at Magaberry, Doyle watched the broadcast on a bolted TV. For the first time in months, he spoke in full sentences, as if the sight of Gate 14 had opened a hatch. "He liked the gate," he told the nurse. "He said gates are like mouths. They take in, they spit out." The nurse wrote it down with a shaking hand. We read it online an hour later. We stayed awake because sleep felt like ignorance. After midnight, the docks hummed like a bad dream. Officers unrolled tape that had been unrolled here before for different crimes with different names. A diver unit arrived to sweep a stretch of black water that had thrown back so many answers and kept more. Cameras tracked the bobbing torchlight as if illumination itself could make amends. The detective with the notebook, watching from a living room that smelled of liniment and old paper, squeezed the arms of his chair until his knuckles blanched. In a whisper lost to the room, he apologized to nobody and everyone. "We should have gone back to the gates," he said. "We should have watched the doors." 2 hours before dawn, a call cracked the night. A farmer outside Larne had found a burned-out car in a hedgerow, plates gone, VIN filed. In the ash of the boot, a length of wire, a melted buckle, and a scrap of canvas with a stenciled letter still intact. G, the kind you see on the tarps that cover cargo when the rain comes sideways. Not proof, not peace. Just another piece in a mouth of metal that kept chewing, and then the message we weren't ready for. The podcast host went live outside schedule. Voice finally unmasked, a person with a face and fear in his eyes. A car had followed him for 3 nights. His flat had been searched and set right, the kind of search that leaves the air rearranged. He said he would not publish the name of C until sunrise, until the files were signed into custody, until the gate was surrounded by the kind of light men like C hate. "I won't feed a riot," he said. "I won't give a city permission to burn itself in her name." He looked at the camera the way a man looks when he's about to make himself a target and clicked off. The hours between then and dawn were the longest Belfast had felt since the day the verdict fell. Phones glowed in dark rooms. Kettles clicked on and off across postcodes. A chorus of small metal hearts trying to steady a larger one. Mothers watched daughters sleep. Men who had never prayed found the shape of the prayer their fathers used to say and tried it on. Rain began, then stopped, then began again, like a hand tapping the window. At first light, the host reappeared, pale, jaw set, standing in front of a police station door. He held a folder the color of winter. He said the name. He said the address once, then again, then handed the folder to the officer and asked the camera to bear witness. The name rolled through the city like a siren. It had been there the whole time, hidden under redactions, under neat conclusions, under the tired relief of a solved headline. It started with C because of course it did. It fit the scar like a path fits a foot. Within minutes, patrol cars peeled away from the station like swifts breaking from a wire. Cameras couldn't keep up. Social feeds jammed. We watched the city open its curtains and realized the story it thought it had locked was standing in the street. The last shot before the feeds cut to maps was the detective's notebook on his lap, open to the first page where a word had been written and erased so many times the paper had thinned. Under the scarring of graphite, you could still read it. Gate. And the question that had kept us for 24 years flexed new muscle as the convoy turned toward a house that looked like every other house until it didn't. Did the end wait behind that door? Or another door after it? Another gate? Another mouth? The city held its breath. The lock turned. The frame shivered. The camera shook. Belfast stepped into the hall. The convoy ate the road in tight formation, lights low, engines holding their breath. Streets that had always looked ordinary, semis with satellite dishes, bins out for collection, a bicycle left leaning, warped under the weight of what they were about to host. Neighbors parted curtains, phones lifted, Belfast tilted, trying to see. The house at the end of the cul-de-sac wore its innocence like fresh paint. Number 23, hedge trimmed, a wind chime that had learned only one song. The gate squeaked open, and it sounded like a verdict. They hit the door at 0611, the hinge giving with a bark, the frame bowing for the first time in 20 years. The hall smelled of polish and damp, of a life curated to be forgettable. Family photographs on the wall, but faces turned just out of frame, a chorus of shoulders and chins. In the kitchen, a kettle. Of course, a kettle. Newer, shinier, innocent. It clicked on when an officer brushed the switch by accident, and the sound made everyone angrier. Rooms were cleared, small and neat, the kind of spaces that never catch light in the middle of the day. Then the back door, a padlock on the shed that had been painted the same color as the wood to pretend it wasn't there. A crowbar, a breath, a crack. The first thing the torch found was a reel of blue thread. Colm Crawford did not run. Colm Crawford. He was in the garage, hands already raised as if he'd been practicing the shape of surrender. The scar on his cheek was a pale river with old ragged banks. He wore a cap. He wore the flat affect of a man who had convinced himself he was a roomer. He said nothing as they cuffed him. He said nothing as the wind chime counted his steps. To the camera across the street, he was a blur with a line through it. Inside the shed, order masqueraded as chaos. Crates, ledgers, a corkboard under a tarp, pinned with maps of streets, no tourist walks, and timetables that meant nothing unless you delivered things that shouldn't be delivered. In a biscuit tin like the one at Gate 14, scraps, ticket stubs, names, clipboard sheets with roots traced in red. In a jar, buttons. One was gray plastic with a scratch shaped like a crescent moon. It matched the spare sewn inside Maeve's winter coat. Another jar held threads cut to thumb length, knotted at one end, blue, blue, blue. Belfast had wanted a monster. It got a filing system. They pulled the floorboards and found a trap lined with contractor bags as careful as a nurse making a bed. No body, not here, but a set of keys tagged with masking tape. 14. A photograph folded down to the eyes. Maeve, at the bakery, confetti caught in her hair, the smile that had taught a city the shape of hope. The fold felt personal, like a man who cannot bear the human part of the face but keeps the rest for inventory. Someone swore, softly. Someone else said don't. Crawford's eyes flicked once when they laid the photograph on the table. Not grief, not guilt, something like irritation, as if the picture had ruined the symmetry of his morning. When they asked him about the docks, he smiled with only the half of his mouth the scar had left alone. I'm a builder, he said, and it was not an answer. When they asked about Daniel Crowe, he lifted his cuffed hands as if to say, here are my wrists, measure them, weigh them. They won't balance your scales any better. At Magaberry, the news reached Doyle like a pulse. The name, printed on the screen, spoken in corridors, scrawled on a scrap of paper by a nurse who shouldn't have, knocked something loose. The words came in a river that carried debris. He liked gates because they made you feel there was only one way. He said a mouth should have teeth. He said we were the teeth. He choked on that. Then quieter. I took her to 14. I don't know what he did. I didn't watch. The guards stared at the floor because looking at a man when he says that makes you complicit in the image. They wrote it down, and the city devoured it before the ink dried. All day, crews tore at Crawford's life. In a loft eave, they found an old postal satchel marked with a number long retired. In the freezer, wrapped in butcher paper, small parcels labeled with dates. Not flesh, not horror, locks of hair bound with blue thread. 10, 12, no one said the number out loud because putting a number on it is how you lose the city. Each tag had initials that lined up with old missing notices and a few that belonged to cases you'd never heard of because some families do their mourning in kitchens without press. The press did not wait. Scarman named. House raided. Blue thread again. Pundits who had once walked this story like a tourist trail now ran it like a relay, passing outrage from camera to camera. On talk radio, callers asked if justice could be retrofitted. Could you have a new trial without admitting the first had been too neat? Could you share guilt between men like you divide a bill? The law has words for some of this, not all. The law is tidy. The city is not. Maeve's brother drove to the docks and stood with his back to the container stack as if he could hold it up by will. He refused interviews with a face that said every sentence would be a scream. Finally, to one microphone, he gave 7 words. Tell me where she is right now. The now was the point. 24 years had been a trick of tenses, and he was done with grammar. The search widened. Fields turned. Drains opened their iron eyelids. At Gate 14, divers went down again into black water that smelled old as bad memory. A woman watching from the fence prayed not for a miracle, but for bones. Bones would make a mother of earth. Bones would let you teach a gravestone how to spell. The detective with the notebook, watching from his chair, mouthed the psalm he'd forgotten he knew. Not for God, for rhythm. By evening, the interrogation clipped like wire. Crawford wore calm like an appliance drawing a low, steady current. Did you know Maeve? I knew the type. Did you coordinate with Crow? I coordinate lists. Did you take her from the stairwell? I don't climb stairs for exercise. The answers were noise, not signal. Then a question slipped past his guard the way a hand finds the keyhole in the dark. Why the thread? Why blue? He looked up just once, as if surprised anyone had noticed the ritual. To keep from unraveling, he said. The room went cold in a way heaters do not fix. Night arrived and did what it does, magnified everything. The podcast host, looking older than the morning had promised, went live outside the station under a streetlight that made his breath visible. He said what the police would not, that Crawford's garage had contained a ledger with columns marked D, G, and R. The host, a man who had learned caution the hard way, did not interpret the letters. The city did it for him, instantly. Delivery, gate, return. Return to what? To where? To whom? The comments scrolled in real time like panic in English. The blue thread jars broke the last of the doubters. The word accomplice did not feel big enough anymore. The story slid on its axis. Doyle, the man the city had taught itself to hate, became the middle hinge on a larger door. It did not absolve him. It did not damn him alone. It placed him where he had always said he stood, between, delivered, leaving at a gate, not absolution, geometry. Just after midnight, a uniformed officer with a voice you could pour tea on stepped to the podium. He said there had been an additional recovery, an address on the ledger, an old meatpacking facility outside Dunmurry, derelict since the summer Belfast tried to get healthy. In the boiler room, behind a false wall, they had found a cavity. Inside, canvas rolls bound with wire, silted with dust. The room learned a new silence while he swallowed. Human remains, he said. Not one. Several. Late-stage decomposition, commingled, painstaking separation required. They would need time. He looked like a man apologizing for the weather. Time was something this story had abused. In the dark of that building, under bulbs that buzzed as if the current were nervous too, forensic teams laid out what the ledger and its letters had promised. Tags, thread, bone. A buckle with a crescent scratch that matched the spare button. A hair clasp with a pattern her mother had described years ago to a detective who had written it down, and then, in the gilt of his living room, traced with his finger like braille. And in a pocket of silt, small as a coin and as heavy, the charm of a star from a bracelet with a broken clasp. They called Maeve's brother on a phone that turned to stone in his hand. They told him what they could without breaking him. Identification would take time. DNA protocols. Teeth that told stories about childhood sugar. He said the word his mother had given the world like a prayer. Home. He said it twice, the second time to make it true. Morning came hard, the light unkind to faces that had not slept. Crawford was moved to a secure wing. On the way, he caught his reflection in a window and for the first time looked at the line on his cheek, like it was not a river, but a rope. He asked for a solicitor, he asked for water, he did not ask for God. In another building, Doyle wrote a statement in a hand that shook so badly it read like winter. He gave times, routes, gate numbers, names he had bit down on for decades until they ached like broken teeth. The law would decide what to do with cracked truth from a convicted man. The city did not wait for rulings. It took the words and made them a map. At noon, the detective with the notebook, jacket pressed, tie crooked, stubbornness upright, let himself be rolled to the fence outside gate 14. He looked small there, a man dwarfed by the steel mouths he had once underestimated. A reporter shoved a microphone like a dare. He waved it away and spoke to the gate instead. "We should have asked you first," he said. "We should have asked where you spit people out." The gate said nothing. Steel rarely taunts, but the river breathed, and that felt like answer enough. The podcast released one final episode and called it what the city had not been brave enough to whisper, mouths. It stitched the names, the routes, the dock numbers, the silent houses and cul-de-sacs that looked like every holiday advert. It did not gloat. It did not say, "I told you." It ended with tape. Maeve in a bakery laughing at a joke you couldn't hear, flour like snowfall on her sleeves. The credits rolled over that laughter. Thousands watched it the way you watch weather change. By evening, the formal language arrived. Arrest made in connection with multiple murders. Recovery ongoing at industrial site. Family liaison officers in attendance. Behind the announcements, a brother stood in a room with walls he could not feel and stared at a bag containing a star charm. He put his hand to the plastic like he was touching a forehead. He did not cry. The human animal dries out in certain winds. Belfast did what Belfast does. It gathered. The alley glowed with candles, and their small, stubborn insistence that light can be worn like a badge. New graffiti bloomed beneath the old. The Black Sea, surrounded by the word the city had been afraid to paint and now painted everywhere. Found. People stood shoulder to shoulder and said her name as if saying it together could make the syllables less sharp. The bakery, new owner, same ovens, gave tea to anyone with hands cold enough to need it. In the window, a blue ribbon tied in a bow that would stay until the knot forgot how to untie. Justice would move at its pace. Trials, appeals, statements, sentences. Lawyers would learn the choreography of two men bound by a third word, gate. The city would sit through it. It had practice. But some things do not require courtrooms. A parcel of earth would be chosen. A hole would be dug with care. Bones would be laid like sentences finally punctuated. A stone would be carved with a name and two dates, one exact, one approximate, and a dash between. That would mean more than granite knows how to hold. People would bring flowers and, for the first time in 2 decades, know where to place them. In Magaberry, Doyle watched the vigil on a television that turned faces into soft squares of color. He placed his palm against the glass when the camera found the alley and held it there until the heat fogged the screen. The nurse switched the set off to save the tube, and he let his hand fall. "I'm sorry," he said, to the wall, to the gate, to a kettle that had cooled a lifetime ago. "I should have opened the mouth and shouted. It sounded like a confession to cowardice, which is a crime the law doesn't list, but the soul knows by heart." Crawford sat in a room where the hum of the light mocked all songs. He asked what the word found meant, and the officer repeated it without adding anything that would make it humane. He stared at the scar in the two-way mirror. He smiled without teeth. His ledger had run out of pages. The blue thread on the table looked ridiculous now, thin, ordinary, insufficient to hold anything together. He flicked it with his finger, and it curled like a dead insect. And the detective with the notebook, that old chronicler of almosts, closed the cover for the last time. He wrote 4 words on the back before he set it on the shelf. Solved is finished now. Not neat, not perfect, but finished. He turned from the window and let the city go on without him because it would. Because that is what cities do when they survive themselves. Belfast slept that night the way you sleep after a storm, one ear open, one hand still on the candle you forgot to blow out. In kitchens, kettles clicked and did not sound like lies. In bedrooms, mothers and daughters set their alarms and found the number had lost its threat. The wind chime at number 23 learned another note. The gate at the docks sagged a little, as if tired of being a mouth. In the morning, the rain came back, lighter, not insisting, washing the chalked sea from the pavement until only the tail of the letter remained, curling into something that looked like a hook and then like nothing at all. On the bakery wall, someone taped up a headline clipped from a paper that had earned it the hard way. Belfast, 2001 cold case solved, remains recovered, second arrest made, city mourns and moves. Under it, someone else had written in pen, not neat, not for posterity, keep the lamps lit, keep the gates shut, and for once that felt like an instruction everyone knew how to follow.